Hi, my name is Finley Urschel, and this is the electric vehicle's financial effect on the car world. So, as a lot of people know, the Model T laid the groundwork for the sales model of all cars now. Henry Ford initially wanted to create the universal car affordable and useful to all. And following that model, companies have been driving to make cars cheaper to appeal to lower income people. However, over the last 100 years, a new car has jumped on the scene, and that is an EV, and possibly a new sales model. So what exactly are EVs? Well, EVs, or electric vehicles, are cars that run on electricity instead of gas. It can be charged in your own home or in public, and gas vehicles, which we're all used to, are also known as ICEVs, or internal combustion engine vehicles, which combine compression, air, and gasoline to create small explosions to create forward propulsion, and in turn create more pollution than the electric vehicles. So what is my research question? Well, I wanted to know, how has the introduction of electric vehicles into the market affected car prices on the used car market? And why is this important? Well, for me, I grew up around cars, and seeing EVs jump on the car scene, I was very curious to see how prices of cars, both EVs and ICEVs, have been affected now that they have conjoined in the used car market and they've been around long enough to be on the used car market. But more importantly for you, I wanted to provide substantial info for used car buying in the future, because I believe that there is a new sales model with EVs on the used car market. So, my lit review. First, I wanted to analyze the used car market, and to do this, I found a bunch of different equations that have been used throughout time to find how much a car would cost on the used car market. They could be qualitative, quantitative, or both, and the big ones that I studied were from economists Jay Chol Kim, Devirat Purohit, Alexander Kim, and Colin Vance. But I found, for me, the one that related best was Devirat Purohit's, whose equation included but was not limited to a change in horsepower, attributes, style, sister or competitor cars, basically cars that fit the same bill as the car trying to be sold, age effects, brand, and even downsizing. Second, I wanted to look at the true effects of EVs on something like the environment. And I found that ICEVs actually produce a specific type of air pollution called fine particulate air pollution, which causes 3 to 4 million annual deaths worldwide. So it has a much bigger effect than people realize, and I believe that it has been minimized and it has become normal for this statistic. And interestingly enough, a 10,000 kilometer test was done on both an ICEV and an EV for comparison, and it's found that a Corolla actually emitted 2,000 kilograms of CO2e, which is that fine particulate air pollution that causes deaths, while an EV only emits 1,387 kilowatt hours of CO2e, a significant drop and something that definitely should be noted when looking at buying cars. Finally, I want to look at the demand for EVs, and I found that 6 in 10 of prospective car buyers have some interest in purchasing an electric vehicle, which is an overwhelming majority, which I had not previously anticipated. And backing that up, by 2030, the companies agree. Volkswagen and Ford expect their sales to be 50% EVs, and Toyota expects to be selling 3.5 million EVs annually. So what is my gap? Essentially, nobody has studied how the introduction of EVs is affecting the used car market as a whole, as most people studying the used car market just isolate the price fluctuations specifically. I wanted to look at the sales model. So what's my method? First, I wanted to set a baseline, and for the cars that I wanted to be studying, because in order to actually find a sales model, I needed to study something. And I found that the 3 big categories, naturally, were sedans, SUVs, and trucks. Unfortunately, I had to omit trucks because there just simply was not enough data for it. And then for my parameters for these three categories, which was omitted down to 2, was a similar price, similar size, and they had to be high selling in the United States, because all of the used car data that I would be taking would be from websites where the listings are in the United States, so it couldn't be an electric vehicle outside of the United States that is high selling in a place like China. So given these parameters and baselines for types of vehicles, I came to the conclusion of my 2 sedans being an Audi A4 and a Tesla Model 3, and an SUVs of the Ford Edge and a Tesla Model Y. So my initial method was surrounding the model I talked about before, which was Devirat Purohit's equation on studying the used car market. However, I needed to add something because of EVs, and those 3 things that I came to the conclusion of was a numerical value that elaborated on the critical reception of electric vehicles, a value for the demand of EVs, what percentage of people can actually afford an average EV at a given time, because as you all know, they are more of an expensive car, and a quantified environmental effect of the average EV in the context of making choices in purchasing an EV. However, I actually had to throw out this equation. This was my initial method, but after looking closer, a lot of the factors that go into this equation, things like style changes, sister cars, none of that can be used because Tesla doesn't have enough competition, so the sister cars aren't relevant. And they also have not been updated because they haven't been on the market long enough. So no physical changes have actually been made to the Tesla. So a lot of the factors that you would look at on the used car market are not applicable. Because of this, I actually ended up collecting data from used car websites instead. At first, I was just taking data from any car website that you and I would know. But instead, I found out that you had to use non-aggregate websites. Websites like CarMax, Carvana, TrueCar, and Cars.com was where I got led to. I didn't want to take from an aggregate website because I didn't want duplicate listings, and I feel like that would skew my data. I also limited it to an age range of 2015 to 2021 and a mileage range of 10,000 to 100,000 because too far in either direction, I believe that there would be outliers in price. So there's a lot of data from this study, so I was just going to go over the key points. First, the data from my specific study, which is the used car website data. Firstly, I wanted to look at average prices. The Audi and Ford comes out to average prices of $20,000 and $21,000 respectively, while the EVs come out to average prices of $27,000 and $37,000, which is significantly more expensive than that of the ICEVs. Also, the average age difference between each. As you can see, the EVs are 6.6 and 5.3, which is interesting, and I will go over later. But accordingly, unlike the ICEVs, the EVs had about a 4-year age and a 2-year age, which I attribute to the fact that the Model Y came out more recently than the Model 3. And then finally, the mileage. The Ford on average had less mileage than the Audi, which correlates with the average age being higher with that of the Audi. And then similarly, you can see that the Model 3 on average has more miles than the Model Y because it has been out longer. Next, I wanted to look at total sales, which I get this data from goodcarbadcar.net. It's a database of a bunch of different car data, but this was specifically a model that they took from over 100,000 different cars, and it looks at the total sales of each car. And I found that there was a steady decline in the A4, as you can see here, and that the Model 3 was, in general, on an increase. The only year that there was a drop was the COVID year when all car sales were down. And the only reason that that last year is also low is because it was mid-year, and that is 2024. Next, we're looking at the Ford Edge and the Model Y for total sales. And interestingly enough, the Ford Edge has been increasing in the last 3 years for its for its total sales. And just like the Model 3, the Model Y has only been on an upward trend. Finally, I wanted to look at a predictive model that wasn't the model I used, and it was actually a model from CarEdge.com, which followed the idea of, again, taking those hundreds of thousands of data points of cars across the used car market and aggregating them into a model that was applicable for these cars. And it was the big interesting key points for both the sedans and the SUVs actually is the residual value overall and the residual value of the first year. As you can see, the residual value of the Audi A4 drops to 33% over 10 years, while the Model 3 only drops to 52%. And in the first year, the Model 3 drops less than 2%, and the A4 drops over 10%. So basically, the Model 3 is holding value way better. And you can see the same thing is consistent with the SUV in that the residual value of the Edge drops to 34%, while the Model Y drops only to 52%, and the same thing with the initial residual value with this one dropping almost 9%, and that one not even dropping 2% once again. Finally, I next wanted to see what were the narratives of this data. First, the EV price premium. It was something more expected, but simply the EVs are more expensive for no apparent reason other than the fact that they are an EV. And I believe this is because of that environmental effect. They're not proven more reliable, they're not proven to be essentially better, just they're better for the environment, and they are something new and shiny. Next, I wanted to address the SUV takeover. As you can see that the Edge was increasing in sales and the Audi was dropping in sales, I think it's clear that SUVs are slowly taking over the market. And it was also seen in that the average age of the Edge was actually lower than the Audi A4, proving that more people have been buying SUVs in recent years. In addition, 19 of the top 25 and all but one of the top 10 selling cars in the year of 2023 were non-sedans excluding Tesla, which which transitions me into my next point, is that there is no competition for Tesla. It became clear when determining what cars to use that Tesla doesn't really have any competition. There's no real sales of other cars other than Tesla in both the sedan and SUV category. The only real cars that have an EV motor are hybrids, and those are the only things to break the top 25. However, my biggest narrative around this study was that EV prices are only affected by mileage. ICEVs are actually evenly affected by mileage and age, while EVs are only affected by mileage. A 42,000 and 40,000 mile Model 3 with a 4-year age difference is actually within $1,000 of each other. So even though the age difference is quite large, if the mileage is tight and in the same area, the price will be very similar. And on the other hand, a 9-year-old 26,000 mile Edge will cost within $1,000 of a 5-year-old 60,000 mile Edge, which would not be the case for an EV. And it's even more proven in that the average prices of EVs over 4 years, when given that they were in even mileage, only dropped $2,500. The one last thing I wanted to address was the limitations. I wanted to use a predictive model, but unfortunately for what I wanted to do, my predictive model was not able to be used. So I went to other people's predictive models who had already worked it out and figured out a way to aggregate different data to employ it in a way that was useful. And in addition, I think that the predictive models for EVs seem doubtful. I think that some of the numbers that were attributed in the graphs from CarEdge seem dubious at best. Even though they were useful, I think that there could have been issues with them. In addition, the lack of EV trucks. As stated before, I really wanted to include trucks in this study, but there's simply not enough EV trucks to be used. Trucks are very prevalent in the ICV market, and actually 3 of the top 5 selling cars in 2023 were trucks. But things like the R1T, the Rivian, and the Ford F-150 Lightning simply have not been around long enough or accumulated enough sales for it to be used in this study. Finally, COVID-19's effect. I believe that there was a chance that COVID could have affected a lot of these numbers, and I think it would be interesting to see a study where COVID was actually looked at as a possible effect. So, how has the intro of EVs into the car world affected the used car market? Well, it wasn't what I expected. I expected a significant change in actually ICEV prices, but instead I found a new sales model. By not losing value as they age and only to mileage, due to the lack of physical updates and real competition, EVs and Tesla specifically have created a vehicle and format of car buying we've never seen before and completely changed how people should approach car buying. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Nice job. Okay, we got a couple of questions for you, and then we'll wrap this up. So for the first one, how did your initial exploration of the scholarly work, how did that help to inform your research question?
Yeah, so initially I was looking at a lot of different equations, and even though I couldn't use those equations like I wanted to with Purohits, they led me down the path of looking at the used car market in the way that I did. So even though I couldn't use them specifically, a lot of the factors that they did employ were factors that I included when looking at things like the mileage and the age of the cars and how that affects the price.
Terrific. And then follow up to that, how do your findings provide directions for future research? Like you gave a couple of suggestions for that, but how are they directly related to what you found out?
So, like I said, I think I found a new model of sales with the EV. And one thing I really wanted to study but didn't get to was hybrids. I wanted to include hybrids because, as I talked about in that top 25 sales of the year, hybrids were another big contributor in those numbers. So as I said, EVs included were the Teslas and nothing else, but there were hybrids in that top 25. So I would be curious to see if there was a new sales model in hybrids as well.
And then finally, what was the most important research skill that you acquired as part of this process, and what else do you think you could apply that to?
Yeah, I think overall it's just general trial and error. Because I went a long time trying to figure out how to implicate Purohit's equation, how to work it out, how to omit certain factors in order for it to work at its very best. But overall, I decided to just completely throw it out and use it to my advantage and take me in a direction that I could use. And I think this could be applied in so many ways in my life because I've always struggled personally with like angst with stuff like that. So I think I learned a lot from that specifically, and just general trial and error, and just staying with it and keeping going, and how to pivot when something doesn't go the way it should.
Okay, terrific.